All right, welcome back um, to the JFK assassination audit. This is video number 93. It is 14 December. And I'm going to probably go for a while in a different direction here. Um, I, I don't know if I came across this video the first time, or I think I've seen this video a couple of times, but I was watching it this time and it just clicked in my head. Hey, he's not just giving a presentation, he's asking questions. This is, sorry. This is Cyril Weck. We all know Cyril Weck. You know, God bless him. He's passed on, but he was a great coroner, forensic scientist. And he did a lot of presentations on the JFK assassination, brought up a lot of stuff. But I never thought of actually writing down the questions that he asked. And in this question, in this symposium from 2003, yeah, 2003, November 20th through 23rd, it says the National Symposium on the 40th anniversary of the JFK assassination, solving the great American murder mystery, the fourth annual Forensic Science and Law Conference, Duquesne University. I'm not sure where that's at. I think Duquesne, isn't that like Iowa or something? November 20th through 23rd, 2003. And I watched it and I had to go back and watch it again because I'm like, oh my God, he's actually asking questions that make a lot of sense. And I kind of jotted them down here. We're not going to watch the whole video. I'm probably going to get some kind of copyrights ding or something on it. But I'm going to watch it. I'm going to turn the video, my recording off, watch it to the point where I get to the question. And then I'm going to play it and record it and show you the question he's asking and maybe a little bit of what he's following up on. And then um, we're going to go through all these questions. And then I'm going to go back and research these questions and try to figure out some answers. He's asked them some really, really good questions. And I'm sure a lot of people, like for instance, he says, who selected Holmes and Boswell to do the autopsy on the president? I'm sure there are people out there in the JFK research community that know these answers to almost all these questions. I personally don't. I'm sure there are other laymen out there that personally don't. Um, and he's going through asking all these questions. Why did the government exclude the best coroners in the country? Because they were civilians. He goes on and talks about how there's these three great coroners, best coroners in the world. Okay, he's talking about. But yet, and a lot of them were standing by the phone ready to go, okay, to DC if the call came, but they never were called. And they asked these amateurs who had never done a murder autopsy before to do the autopsy on the most important murder case in the last 200 years, the murder of JFK, President John F. Kennedy. So, very interesting. And then he goes into other things like who ordered the limousine to be washed, scrubbed, and cleaned. Great, great thing, you know. Of course, you hear the excuse saying that they were panicked and they didn't want JFK or civilians to see the blood and crap like that. But I don't know about the 50s and 60s, but I would assume that the Secret Service would have some kind of law enforcement forensics training that would teach them about crime scene preservation and not to disturb a crime scene and to gather evidence and things like that, not to destroy it. Um, but all these things were looked over. And I, just, it dawned on me if we can find out who these people are that caused all these things to happen, there, my friend, I think we have the answer to who killed the president of the United States. Because you need certain people with certain powers to order the president's casket to be removed from Parkland Hospital. Because the agents that are acting on orders because they've been ordered to do it and they're trying to preserve their jobs. And if they refuse the order, they're going to lose their jobs. So there's somebody above them that's telling them to do it. Okay? There's somebody above them that's giving them orders to wash out the car. There's somebody that ordered the president's limo to be sent to Detroit and repaired instead of being gone over with a fine tooth comb to pull out any bullet fragments, you know. And, who ordered John Connolly's clothes to be dry cleaned? This is other questions that he's going through. And then he says, who made the decision to take the body out of Dallas, not have an autopsy, even though the Dallas coroner, Earl Rose, was perfectly capable of doing the autopsy there? You see, when you have an autopsy, it clears up everything. A legal autopsy. When you're trying to cover up something that I mean, if it's just some lone nut, Oswald, right? Why not let Earl Rose do the autopsy? The president's dead. Earl Rose is there. He could do the autopsy right there at Parkland. But yet, they pulled guns and forced the president's body out of the hospital, into the limo, and into the awaiting Air Force One to make their escape. And then he also says, what happened to the brain? Where is it buried? Is it in JFK's grave? Will we ever know that? Because if you can see the brain, you can track the wounds. I get these videos on my Facebook, and it shows, like, I guess they're going around Germany and around old trench lines and where people were buried and stuff, and then they're finding like skeletons, and they're finding skulls, and they're finding German helmets on, rattled around with the skulls. Maybe they're separate, but they can take the skull of the dead German soldier, put it up into the helmet, and line up the hole from the bullet that killed him that went through the helmet into the skull, and they can line up those those holes, and show you that's the same went through the helmet, went into the brain. So a brain's gonna, or not a brain, but a skull, bone fragments are gonna physically have characteristics of showing you the direction of the bullet that hit it. Okay, so whoever caused the president's brain to disappear, that it's not in the National Archives anymore, and there's no paperwork showing that it was signed out, even though it was put into the National Archives. There's no paperwork that he says showing that it was ever properly signed out for or removed. Whoever did that probably was in the conspiracy, because a lone dead nut is not going to have the capability, okay, of removing the president's brain from the National Archives, or his skull, I should say. And don't you think that there's a vertebrae, right? And if the bullet went through his neck, right, there's going to be some kind of wound to the spinal column, the spinal bones, the vertebrae, right? Gotta be. They can't just pass through the neck and not hit the bone, right? So there's going to be evidence there. And then he goes on and says, whatever happened to the slide tissues? All the slide tissues from the autopsy, all gone. How is that possible? You know, they have, the Sunset killer that went around and raped and killed back in the early 1970s. They have sperm samples, rape kit samples, they've got blood, they've got hair fibers, all kinds of forensic evidence from 50 something years ago. Okay. For, I'm not saying these women that were raped and killed weren't important, but, minor civilians. But you got the most important, murder in our entire country's history, and they've lost the brain, they've lost the tissues. How's that possible? Who signed those out? When I was in the military, you signed out a fucking pencil, you had to sign for it. Okay? We're talking about the president's brain. And who had Dick Sprague removed from the HRAC? He talks about how Dick Sprague was on the House Representatives Assassination Committee. He started off there and he was forced out. And who was responsible for no index in the 26 volumes of the Warren Report? They had 26 volumes. They had all those, people interviewed, but nobody bothered to put an index in there. And then the Warren Commission test firing those Carcano bullets. You know what they did? According to what he says, they went through and they did several different shots, goat carcasses, bones, slabs of meat, gel portions, fruit, all kinds of things. And they had the different bullets afterwards. And the one that went through just the little tiny sheep bone was completely obliterated and bent all up. But we're supposed to believe that this one magic bullet went through the president's back, went through his shoulder blade, went up through his vertebrae, popped out of his neck, went forward, turned right, lined up and hit Connolly in his shoulder blade. Okay. Went through Connolly and hit him in his wrist. He's holding up his Stetson hat. And then went through the wrist bone and went straight into his thigh. And then somehow it, you know, it worked its way out of his thigh. And why wouldn't it be in the seat, in the floor? That's where it should be, right? But yet, where do they find the bullet? They find it on the stretcher where Kennedy. It ended up on Connolly's leg, but they find it on the stretcher where Kennedy had been operated on. And then we get this crazy story about Secret Service agent Landis, who now, 60 something years later, comes out, 2 years ago, and says, I never knew about the conclusion about all the bullets and I never read anything about his assassination. He had nightmares about it, but he never read anything about the assassination, no books, nothing. And finally he read a book, and then like 10 years ago, he's fucking 80 years old. And then he goes, oh, no, that's not how it happened, because I found the bullet. Didn't watch the goddamn news. On TV, surely they would have mentioned the Warren Report on the news. And he says, no. When we got Kennedy to the hospital, another Secret Service agent covered Kennedy's body up and carried him into the emergency room. He noticed bullet fragments in the seat and then a bullet on the rim right above where Kennedy's back was at, where the bubble top would go down. So apparently Kennedy got shot in the back, and then when he was shot in the head and thrown backwards, his body slammed up against the seat, forcing the bullet out onto the rim. How that's possible, I don't know. Um, but that's the magic bullet. And he said he took that, he removed the bullet from where it was located, completely disturbing the crime scene. Okay. If you or I had done this as a civilian, we would go to jail for disturbing a crime scene. Surely he had some kind of fucking crime scene procedure training back in the 60s. This fucking Secret Service, right? They all go through the same damn federal training, right? Maybe it was a little different back then. I don't know. But, even a fucking flunky Gomer Pyle Mayberry RFD, you know, sheriff's deputy would know not to touch anything in a crime scene, which the whole limo is a crime scene. Okay? But he picks up the bullet because he said there were people coming and he didn't want it to, get lost. Well, you stay there, you don't leave. Okay? And till someone else in the Secret Service secures that crime scene and starts going over it. They don't have a forensics team in the Secret Service or the FBI. I don't know. But it's crazy. So he picks up the bullet, puts it in his pocket, and then takes it into the surgery room where Kennedy is laying on the table. And then he decides in his right thinking mind that, hey, well, this would be a good place for me to leave that bullet on the table so it won't get lost. What the fuck? What kind of crazy, insane thinking goes on? I mean, I know there's stress and everything, but my God, if anybody, you or me, have seen all the blood and the bullets and everything, yeah, we'd all panic. Yeah, right. Civilians, we're not trained in that. But a goddamn Secret Service agent, okay? Don't touch the bullet in the crime scene. Don't touch the crime scene. And then you leave the fucking bullet on the fucking structure. You don't give it to any of your supervisor agents that are sitting there right there. Oh, you didn't because you realized you fucked up. You should have never touched the bullet. Anyways, you got this crazy fucking story. But it does explain a lot. Or it could just be bullshit from an 80-year-old man. What are you going to do? Throw an 80-year-old man in jail? But if that's true, it blows the shit out of the whole Warren Commission because you can't have a bullet, okay? If you got a bullet behind the president on the rim, okay, and you got a bullet in his head, and then you got a bullet hitting the curb, okay, and there's only enough time for 3 shots, that means there's another bullet that's hitting Conley in the back. And therefore, you've got a second assassin, my friend. And so, what if you add in the Landis stories? What it says is, boom, first shot misses. But here's the thing: you got to have more than 4 shots because the guy who was down by the underpass, he heard the shooting. Okay, and as he moved closer, as there were more shots, then he got hit right before the car went by him. So that means there were 5 shots because you have 1 shot go off behind him. The little girl running in the red dress to the right of the left of the car, she hears the shot too. She stops moving. That's 1 shot. Everyone looks behind them. Even Kennedy is waving, stops waving, and looks behind him. The governor got his hat, starts turning. He turns to the left, then he turns to the right to find out where the shot came from. And then Kennedy comes out from behind the sign and he's hit in the neck. Well, is he hit in the neck or is he hit in the back and reacting? Or is he hit with both? Maybe he got hit in the neck and maybe he got hit in the back at the same time. So that's 3 shots right there already. You got 1 shot that missed, 1 shot that hits Kennedy in the back and pops out and Landis finds it. Another one that hits him in the neck. The only problem with the one hitting him in the neck, what happened to the bullet? There should be a big ass hole in the back of the president's neck, right? Where is that? Who knows? Did it fall out also? And then Connolly gets shot in the back. And then there's that hole in the windshield. See, and then as they go drive by, there's this kid that dives. You see him clearly diving away from a bullet that he must have thought hit near him because no one else is diving. They're all standing there watching the president get shot. That kid is reacting to a bullet that just hit the curb, hit the ground right near him. And that's exactly where later a woman finds a streak in the ground, and there's another bullet there that a sheriff deputy gets and takes away. They got bullets flying all over the fucking place. How can one guy with a broken ass old Peacemaker Carcano be firing bullets all over the place in 5.6 seconds? Impossible. With a bolt action rifle? Impossible. It's got to be multiple shooters. If there's multiple shooters, it's a fucking plot. And it's not just Oswald. And then everybody knows that Oswald was in the fucking second floor lunchroom. Because within 90 seconds, the officer sees the pigeons on the roof, runs into the front door, says, "Who's in charge here?" Oswald's boss says, "It's me." They run to the back. They go to the elevator. They're not working. The power's out in the building. Isn't that funny? They run to the back elevator. It's not working. They run up the stairs. And as they're going up the stairs, the officer sees someone walking away from the door. He goes into the break room and finds Oswald with an open Coke and an open candy bar in his hand, walking away. So that means he was at the machine. He had to, in 90 seconds, would have had to ran across the 6th floor, hidden the gun, ran down 4 flights of stairs, past 2 women that said they came from the 4th floor at this right after the shots and didn't see anyone. And then get to the 2nd floor, get in, fumble for his fucking change, and get a Coke and a candy bar and open both of them and walk towards the door. And then after he hears the officer starts to walk away, all in 90 seconds. Absolutely impossible. So, anyway, so we'll keep going. He says, "Who moved the back wound up 4 inches?" Well, what he's talking about is they did they pulled out the tissues and slides with was it the Attorney General or something in 1967. I think this had to do with the Garrison New Orleans thing going on, and they re-examined the medical evidence they had. Okay, and they said, "Oh, the Parkland doctors, the coroners at Bethesda made a mistake. They got all the tattoos right, the scars from Kennedy's back wounds and war wounds and shit, but they, in their drawings, but they got the bullet wound off by 4 inches. So they moved it up 4 inches, okay? Because if the bullet wound is down any lower, it can't go down at a down angle and then turn and go up and pop out of the fucking Adam's apple. Then he says, why did the FBI not put on the um, why did the FBI not put on the HRC info and investigate more? So a lot of people don't remember this, but the House Assassinations Committee concluded that there were two people. There were more than one shooter. There was a conspiracy, and they forwarded that information on to the FBI, but the FBI declined to investigate it. Why is that? And then he goes on and talks about that movie JFK. Who released the script? Apparently, the news media got a hold of the script, a movie script, 6 months before Oliver Stone released his JFK movie, and they started attacking it on that script. And I can't spell coup d'etat. I've looked and looked. I can't figure out how to fucking spell it. So, and spell check doesn't help. But I'll figure it out and correct it later on. So not too much of it. I just some things, some words I remember, and coup d'etat I just don't remember how to spell it. But so we're gonna watch a little bit of that, and I came up. I started a list of my own additional questions. Okay, and I'll go down some of these real quick, and not all of them, but and then what we're gonna do is I'm gonna research and try to find the answer to these questions. So my questions go back to when Oswald went to Russia. Was Oswald on a false defector? They call it a redskin mission. This is a term I heard that you appear to be a communist, okay, but really you're an undercover agent. You're working for the government. You're a false defector. You go in either and see, and it would make sense because they would check him out, okay. If he already had an affinity towards Russia and maybe he was a little bit left leaning, that would help his creds. Okay, he could get there and say, "Oh yeah, I'm a disaffected, Marine." They would check him out. Okay. Oh, another thing I haven't put down is there was. This is what I think Oswald was doing in Russia. Okay, and um, this guy, I can't remember his name, but he's very big in the JFK assassination um, research community. Um, I can't remember his name, but anyway, I listen to him all the time. But I think he got it. I think he and another woman, um, they got it. What Oswald was doing, whether he knew it or not, was they were trying to flush out a mole in the CIA. Okay, and how you do this is you send over somebody, either they're knowing or they're not knowing. Better if they're not knowing, okay? And you're just using them as bait, okay? And then, we've got spies in their country, they've got spies in our country. Either they blackmail them or they're ideologues or they're paying them. Alder James and all these other guys, they weren't pro communists, they were doing it for the money. So there's all kinds of reasons why people would give information to the Russians. So maybe they got some secretary. They had some East German spy had a sexual liaison with. Okay, in the records of the CIA, because you got to have. You can't always have all agents in the CIA. You got women. They're going to type up memos. Mostly were women back then, and some of them are going to be lonely. They're working hard, and then they're going to find some affected. They're going to find that person, and they're going to run some kind of romance scam on them, and then entrap them or whatever. If you love me, we'll do this, we'll do that. All I need to do is just pull a file. Okay. So what they did with Oswald's file It was under Jesus James Angleton. Okay, and what they did is they ran Oswald, and they knew that when Oswald got over there, somebody was going to send out feelers to try to get Oswald's file if the CIA or the FBI had a file on him. And then they could expose him as, yeah, he's a CIA agent or naval intelligence, whatever. Um, so when you sign out files, okay, you have to sign them out, and then they know who's got that file, who's read in on that file. And so what they did is they took Oswald. They made sure Oswald had a CIA file. They created one, and they left little trailers saying, if you want to find this file, indexed in this office. Okay, so whoever goes poking around, because Oswald shouldn't have a CIA file unless he's working in the CIA, right? Now he could have a file that they're keeping track of him later on when he gets to Russia, but not before he goes to Russia, right? So essentially, what it is, they're setting up bait. Okay, whoever comes looking for this file, boom, they've got their mole. And that's what they did. Jesus James Angleton had, everything pointed to a certain office, but not Jesus James Angleton. He was head of counterintelligence inside the CIA. He was obsessed there was a mole. He was told there were moles by other Soviet defectors and stuff like that. So somebody came looking for Oswald's file. Okay? But here's the thing. They can't go and arrest this person, put him on trial, because then they'll know that Oswald isn't legit. I don't think we really cared about Oswald. Then the Soviets would know they're on to him. Oh shit, we got to get a new guy in there. Or maybe someone told on him. So they're going to monitor this person, and they're going to move him to some other kind of office where they can't have access to all those things, and eventually they're going to find some reason to fire him for something else. And then maybe later on, because you see, they can't send them to prison because that'll send up red flags to the Russians. And they can't run out and say, hey, that we caught this mole, because that'll let the Russians know that they're on to him. Okay? And maybe this guy he slips in the bathtub. Maybe the secretary, falls off a building, crashes her car, something like that. Boom, problem eliminated. But they're not going to go out and say, yeah, we killed this secretary spy because she was our mole. They're not going to say that. It's all going to be done hush hush. But that's what I think Oswald and the other false defectors were. They were putting, see, that's why you want to have multiple false defectors, because if someone is, say Joanne Smith is looking for false defector file number 1, and then she comes looking for false defector file number 2, and then false defector file number 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and Oswald, then you fucking know that she is the goddamn mole. You know it's her. Okay? That's how you get it. I mean, I read these things about these Redskins. They sent this one guy, and he sent his whole fucking family with him, and his parents. Okay, and then they got over there, and they decided they didn't like it, and they all came back. Now, one thing that's really interesting about this is that Marina Petrakova, I believe was her Russian name. Her dad was in the GRU, a colonel, right? And somehow she came in contact with and dated 3 of those American defectors. Now, isn't that fucking strange, right? And then there was this guy that once the assassination happened, her face was all over the news media. there was this Moroccan student who walked into an embassy in Berlin, and the was it the U.S. embassy in Berlin, and says, I know that girl." And they said, "Oh, really? Why would you know her?" And he goes, "I dated her when I was a student in Moscow. The only problem was he dated her in April of '61, right around the time that Oswald was dating her in April of '61 in Belarus, which is a good couple hundred miles away, right? So unless she was doing double time, I personally think that they were taking either prostitutes or girls from families of Russian intelligence people that they could trust, and either depending on the severity of the mission, okay, they wanted to sexually entrap somebody like Trump, they would use prostitutes. They wanted to woo and possibly marry, keep track of a false defector like Oswald, they use some kind of GRU's daughter. And, maybe she liked Oswald. Maybe she got there and said, "Hey, he's not too bad. He's American, you know?" And maybe they sold her on the idea. I personally think, I mean, she didn't go to fucking KGB Academy, okay? She was just like a mafia infiltrator. She had a handler, an agent handler, and she was paid extra money. And I mean, she saw Oswald once, okay, at a dance, and then he got sick, like kidney stones or something. He got sick, food poisoning. I don't know what it was, and she showed up at the hospital. Now, how did she know what hospital he was in? You know, come on. You know, did she go around to all the hospitals looking for this one fucking American she met this one time at a goddamn dance? No, they told her where he was at because they're gonna know where he's at. He's a fucking American. He's gonna stick out like a sore thumb. They're gonna say, "Yeah, we're watching him over at this Moscow Central Hospital or Belarus Central Hospital, whatever it is." Okay, and so they put her on him. And hey, if it works out, tell her, "Hey, you're gonna make extra money, and if it works out, great, good for you." And if you're married to someone, they're gonna tell you a lot more than if they're just dating someone. Okay, so, and and probably the way she thought about it was, well, if I marry him, he'll probably go back to America anyway, and then we can get divorced or cancel the wedding or cancel the marriage, annul it, whatever they do. So I'm just doing my duty for my country because that's what my dad wants me to do. Okay? But maybe she fell for him. I think she got pregnant in the Soviet Union, right? Yeah, she had a daughter over there. And then it took him 2 years to get back. And all along, not only was Oswald making more money than anybody in the factory that he was working at, he was making more than his boss, his supervisor. Somebody was sending Oswald money every month through the Red Cross. Now, who was doing that? That's a big red flag, don't you think? Okay. Why would his mom wasn't sending him money? She barely had any money at all. His brother wasn't sending him money. Who was sending Oswald supplemental money every goddamn month? And why would they do that? Well, if you think about it, if you send someone over there on a mission, you say you're just going to be over there for a couple of years, just go over there, enjoy yourself, learn. You already like Russian, learn Russian, then you can come back. Well, in order to get him to stay a little longer, you're still looking for this fucking mole. You start sending him some money, so he didn't go and blab to the Russians. Yeah, I the fucking Americans sent me over here, and now they've abandoned me, and I'm gonna tell you everything I know. Okay, don't make any fucking sense. Anyway, so and then how did Oswald get a repatriation loan to get back to the U.S.? Now they do have repatriation loans for people who are indigent, but Oswald was indigent. They would. Why didn't they contact his family? And he didn't get just a regular loan to get on. Why didn't he go back to Finland? Okay, because what should have happened is they should have kicked Oswald out into Finland, and then he would have gone to the American embassy, and he would have asked to be repatriated back to America. Okay, that's what should have happened. But they let Oswald stay there and go to the American embassy because they're following him. They're trying to figure out what is he doing? What's he up to? Okay, and they have people inside the embassy that can tell him what he's up to. And that whole spiel that he, you know, I'm renouncing my citizenship. What about? It was like even the guy who got the passport said it was like he was didn't really know what he was saying. He was saying words he didn't know, and it was like he rehearsed it. They had told him he had practiced. Oswald sat. Okay, what was in it? It was in El Toro Marine Base for 6 months before he got a passport in one day to go out of the country. Okay, and he's making money in the Marines, not very much. What, $200, $300 a month at the if he's lucky. He's sending money to his mom. How's he able to save enough money to get a ship from New Orleans to France, and then a boat to England, and then an airplane? He disappears there for a while, and then ends up in Finland and crosses the border into Russia. How does he do that? Where do you get the money to do that? And most people would have gone through East Germany, don't you think? France, West Germany, and East Germany. But he knew to go through the back door. It's something only most espionage agents would know. Anyway, so I'm going to go over these questions. There's just so many things. I've been watching and reading for 30 years, and just so many things just stick out like a sore thumb, you know. And I just been writing them down as I go along. And here, I'll just go on down here. Why wasn't Oswald charged with espionage, or at least interrogated by the FBI when he got back? He wasn't even fucking. Not. There's no indication. There's no paperwork. There's nothing. Don't you think an FBI agent, or at least a immigration, border patrol, somebody, what were you doing in Russia? You know, um, some State Department, somebody would have interviewed him, right? Don't you think they'd be kind of somebody would be curious about what did you see when you're in Russia? What's it like over there? What's the money like? What the people like? Think they would interrogate him, right? They would get information from him. You'd think, right? And don't you think the how come Marina is allowed into the United States so easily? I mean, think about how hard it is to get into the United States right now if you're a foreigner. Okay, and the way the procedure works now is that you've got to go back to America, apply for getting your wife into America, and that could take a year or two. But yet she's allowed to go with him and leave with him, and the child too. Okay, and it's just unbelievable. Did she have a visa? Did she even have a fucking Visa card? Why isn't INS coming by her house? Why isn't? Why aren't they going? Why do we? Why do we don't see any immigration reports about her showing up? Both of them being interviewed at an immigration office in Dallas or Fort Worth, and I mean, they were there from what, June of '62 to November of '63. And wouldn't she have to apply for another visa after a year to renew that visa? And if her husband's in New Orleans, you know, what's going on there? And if she's going to break up and leave him, okay, and she's staying with Ruth Payne up in Dallas, you know, how's that possible? How's she able to do that without her husband? Like, it just never would work today, right? They would come and get her immediately and put her in some kind of detention camp and send her back to Russia. I don't know. And, you know, another thing that's really weird is if Oswald hated America so much, why did he go back? If America was so fucked up, why did he go back? Why didn't he just stay in Russia? Or go to China? Or go straight to Cuba? He could have gone to Cuba from fucking Russia, right? The revolution happened in 57, so it's a good 5 years into it. He could read about it in Moscow or before. And if he hates America so much, why would he even bother to pay off his repatriation loan in less than 6 months working at Jaeger Childs? And they're all living in poverty. They don't have any money, you know, but yet he pays off that damn loan, right? And as soon as he pays off that loan, he gets a rifle. Well, you can get a rifle before you get a fucking repatriation loan. There's no stopping that. You don't need a passport to do that. Doesn't make any damn sense. And why does he order the rifle, mail order, under a false name, Heidel, right? Where he could walk into any gun shop in Dallas. I think Dallas has a few gun shops, right? And purchase a gun. Just give him his Heidel ID, and no one would know. You could get a rifle at one shop, a pistol at another shop, ammo at another shop. No one would know. But yet he leaves this traceable rifle. He orders this traceable rifle through a gun magazine, and you know he ordered the rifle what in February, right after he paid off the repatriation loan, and but yet the Warren Commission makes great hay out of him looking through these gun magazines in the garage next to the Riley Coffee Place in New Orleans in May and June. But Oswald already had the rifle and he already had the pistol. So that didn't make any fucking sense, right? And I've also heard this, I haven't confirmed it yet, that the rifle that he got or they found in the Texas School Book Depository, you know what? It was a different model of rifle than was on the order form that he sent in and paid for. I haven't confirmed that, but that's what I have heard that people are saying. So they could say, well, maybe they ran out of the ones he ordered and they sent him something close to it, right? Maybe. But does the Warren Commission address this? No, they don't. They don't address it at all. They just completely ignore it. And I mean, I could just go on and on and on. I'm going to go on and on, but what I'm going to do is go back over these questions and find some answers, or close to answers I can find. And, you know, another thing about that gun. If you're if you're going to shoot the president of the United States and you're up on the sixth floor of a fucking building, and you've got a long stairwell to go down, don't you think it's going to be kind of hard to shoot your way out with a fucking rifle? And he doesn't do that at all, right? He goes downstairs and hides in the second floor lunchroom, right? But immediately, 90 seconds, there's an officer with a gun in his belly, right? Well, why wouldn't he pull out the gun then and shoot the officer? Because he doesn't have the gun. Why wouldn't he have a gun? You're going to have to shoot your way out, right? Unless you're just going to sneak out somehow. Why wouldn't you bring the revolver with you? Why would you rush home and get the revolver? He rushes home to get the revolver because he realizes that something happened that wasn't supposed to. And that, that scene where he's like, oh, so I'm the patsy. Then he realizes when the officer comes up there and puts the gun in his belly and his boss tells him that Kennedy's been shot, he realizes that his warning, whether you want to say he was the guy who sent that warning to the Chicago office or whatever that office, the New Orleans office, um, or something, because personally, I don't think Oswald was involved in any way in the assassination. I think he either didn't know about the assassination or he was being led on by these right wing groups. Okay, I think what happens when he got back from Russia, he was contacted either the FBI or maybe some kind of right wing militant group or somebody maybe a go between the military and these right wing groups who said, "Hey, you want to make some extra money? Yeah, well, we just want you to keep your eyes open for any sub, um subversives, but keep doing your role as a leftist, and then that'll draw them out." That's what he was trying to do in New Orleans. Okay, and again, you think about it: how common would it be for a communist to be in Dallas? I mean, isn't that fucking like seeing a goddamn Nazi in West Hollywood? Okay, very, very unlikely. Why wouldn't Oswald, if he was such a leftist communist, go to fucking New York, or Los Angeles? Why would he hang? Why would he continue to hang out in Dallas? He moved away from his mom. Why move to New Orleans? Why not move someplace more liberal? Okay, and why is he hanging out with these right wing czarist white Russians? When was Oswald ever in touch with a communist, a left leaning group? There's got to be some liberal professor at one of the colleges, right? Maybe there's a leftist bookstore in all of Dallas, right? Coffee shop, or reading Ginsburg or Huxley or something, right? But has Oswald ever seen at any of those places? Never, ever. Kind of strange for you know a left wing communist. And another thing, Oswald. Okay, as soon as he gets his rifle, he goes and supposedly shoots at Walker, right? Who's a right winger extremist. Got fired by Kennedy, put in an insane asylum by Kennedy until a judge forced him to let him out. So he goes and shoots this right wing Nazi general, member of the Burt Society, and then 6 months later, he's shooting at the same guy who threw him out of the army and threw him in the prison in a insane asylum. He's shooting at the same guy who was going after Walker, who he had been supposedly shooting at, right? And go back to shooting Walker. How does he shoot Walker? How does he get a fucking rifle over there to shoot at Walker? On the bus? Is he broken down that rifle? And Marina Oswald said that he disassembled and buried the rifle near Walker's house, like before the shooting. And then he shot him, and then he buried the rifle again and came back and got it a few days later. Really? Uh, How's he going to carry this damn rifle? Is he carrying it on the bus? Is he walking down the street carrying a damn rifle? How's he getting there and getting back? And this rifle, okay, that he took down to New Orleans, Mrs. Payne drove him to New Orleans, I believe. How does he get this rifle down there without Mrs. Payne seeing the rifle? How, when he goes to Mexico, he doesn't take the rifle with him. He takes the gun, the pistol. Okay, so that means that when they were loading, okay, Mrs. Payne's station wagon, okay, maybe she didn't notice the gun then, but she damn sure would have noticed it when they were unloading it, right? Because didn't Michael Payne unload the car, the station wagon? Wouldn't he recognize that was a fucking rifle? You can't break it down and say, "Oh, it's curtain rods." So wouldn't he say something to Mrs. Payne when he's putting it into the garage? The, the rifle sat there in the garage for a month and a half, and Mrs. Payne, I saw a picture where Mrs. Payne was like making something out of wood, and then they showed where the gun, supposedly the rifle, was put, right, in the blanket, and it was right next to it. Wouldn't she have gotten curious and said, "I wonder what this is? That's unusual. I never saw that before." But she never did. She was surprised when they found the rifle, right? Anyway, I got like 4 minutes left. But I'm going to go into more details on these questions and keep asking more. And if you have any questions you want me to research, put them in the comments and I'll keep going. It's just question after question after question that I have about all of these things. Okay. And why did Oswald go to New Orleans? Because he's got an aunt down there, you know, and leave his wife and child in Dallas? Why can't he just go get another job in Dallas? Is it because of the Walker shooting? Well, nobody knows it's him, right? And how does he just happen to get that job at Riley Coffee Company, like literally 2 or 3 blocks away, okay, from the Lafayette Street address of one of the most right wing people in, Bannister, and Barry was hanging out there, and Riley just happened to be on the what was it called? Inca? Not is it Inca? That anti-communist group that Mr. Riley was on, and also Bannister was on. How coincidental is that? It's very, very bizarre. Anyway, got about a minute left. And when it comes to the assassination, why did the Secret Service, why were they called back to back off? Usually they walk along the side of the limousine or ride along on the back, and then the cops, flank the president on the side. Why were those pulled back? It was, you know, Vincent the Palmer, whatever that guy's name is, Vincent the Palmer. He's done some great videos showing that, city after city after city after city, the Secret Service is there on the car. The motorcycles are on the side, but only in Dallas is all that taken away. Doesn't make any fucking sense, right? Just question after question after question. So I'm going to call this whole series questions. And I'm going to go over all these questions. I'm going to go over first Cyril Weck's questions. We're going to try to find some answers, and then we'll keep going. But there's so many questions that never got answered. It was like the Warren Commission was just trying to pin it on Oswald and close the book and move on. All right, take care, folks, and we'll do this another day. All right, bye bye.